This video is about species concepts and taxonomy. So first, let's have an introduction about this topic. With the help of this video, we are going to learn about typological species concepts, then nominalistic species concept, evolutionary species concept, biological species concept, difficulties in the application of the biological species concept. The species, like the cell and the organisms, is one of the most fundamental units in biology. It is fundamental in two very important ways. One, on the way like it is a basic population and evolutionary unit. Species become transformed through time. They undergo speciation, giving rise to separate and distinct lineages that diversify through time. On the other hand, it is also a basic unit in classification. The widely used definition is that species is a group of actually or potentially interbreeding natural populations that are reproductively isolated from other such groups. Ernest Mayer. The definition is somewhat unrealistic since it considers only sexually reproducing organisms. The species are dynamic, evolving individuals, but we attempt to forge them into rigid classes. They are so important because much of our systematic, ecological, taxonomic, etc. studies are conducted at species level. Then, general characteristics of species. Species is a genetic unit consisting of a large gene pool shared by its members. A species comprises genetically similar individuals share a close common ancestry. The members of a species exhibit distinctive common features which are different from those of other species. Each species is reproductively isolated from other species so that transitional, intermediate, or intergrading forms are usually absent in between two species. Members of species interbreed and produce fertile offspring. Normally, members of different species do not interbreed, and so natural interspecies hybrids are altogether absent or may be very rare. Each species interact with its abiotic and biotic environments. A species occupies a specific ecological niche which may not be occupied or utilized by another. So, two species can never have a same niche. So, related species usually occupy separate but adjoining or nearby territories. Every species evolved from a pre existing ancestral species by acquiring heritable adaptive variations. Typological species concept. Typological species concept is also known as essentialism. It was introduced by Linnaeus and his followers, and it is now a discarded one. Then, allowing to the typological species concept. According to the typological species concept, species are static, immutable, non-variable assemblages, and ideal with the members of each species are only copies of representations of the ideal type. Variation among them are therefore due to the differences in the copying of the ideal type. Thus, in typological species concept, individual organisms have no special importance since they are mere copies of ideal types. Typological species concept upholds the concept of morphological species. This concept was in the philosophies of Plato and Aristotle and was the species concept of Linnaeus and his followers. In 1954 and 1956, regarded the above concept as the morphospecies concept. Another group of scientists refer to this essential species concept because of the members of a taxon or of species can be recognized by their essential characters. This is why essentialist ideology is also referred to as typology. Again, morphospecies or morphological species concept states that one species can be segregated from another species by physical features and can be recognized by their morphological features. This is also called morphological species concept. Criticism, Simpson, Mayer, and recent scientists have not accepted the above concept totally, though it was some positive points. Due to several phenomena such as sexual dimorphism, polymorphism, and age difference, the same species develop strikingly morphologically different. This concept is not applicable in case of sibling species. Then nominalistic species concept. This is a concept that only individuals do exist and species are mere man-made abstractions. So according to it, nature produces only individuals and species are therefore are of no existence. This concept was advanced by Occam and his followers in the 18th century. It is also now discarded on the ground that species are the products of organic evolution and not mere man-made abstractions. Then criticisms. Simpson, Rollins, and Mayer stated that no biologists can agree with this idea that man cannot produce species, and it is the established fact that species are products of evolution. An evolutionary species concept. The evolutionary species concept emphasizes the point that species are not just populations as they exist at any given instant in time, they are also lineages, and the fact that they evolve is very important. These evolutionary species are basically the same things as biological species but considered from somewhat different point of view. Here, each species is an evolutionary lineage evolving independently from one and the same ancestor. Then, evolutionary species concept, a lineage, an ancestral descendant sequence of populations evolving separately from others and with its own unitary evolutionary rules and tendencies. And Simpson has stated that the above definition not only is consistent with the biological or genetical concept of species, but it helps to clarify and to remove some limitations of biological species concept. Mayer has stated that the above definition is related to the phyletic lineage, not indicating a species concept. The evolutionary concept is applicable only to the isolated population and incipient species, but not applicable to the single species. Simpson tried to solve the species definition by adding the time dimension in its species definition. Wiley in 1978 was provided a revised definition of evolutionary species concept. He stated that an evolutionary species is a single lineage of ancestral descendant populations which maintains its identity from other such lineages and which has its own evolutionary tendencies and historical fate. Concept has developed on the basis of six species taxon, not the species category. So, ontological species concept as a species is a single lineage of ancestral descendant sexual population genetically integrated by historically contingent events of interbreeding. Biological species concept. This is the concept which holds that species are groups of interbreeding natural populations reproductively isolated from other such groups. According to it, species are absolute realities typified by individuals and not mere man-made abstractions. Jordan and Mayer are the strong advocates of biological species concept. Biological species concept contain essential aspects of the typological and nominalistic species concept. However, it differs from them in that, in addition to morphological features, it recognizes the population and genetical aspects also. It takes into account the morphological, anatomical, physiological, cytological, biochemical, genetical, ecological, and ethological features of organisms. So, a biological species is reproductively isolated from all other species and therefore it cannot interbreed with them. The complement populations of a species, however, have the capacity either directly or indirectly to interbreed with one another. Such interbreeding not a property of component organisms. It is the exchange of genetic material or genetic gene flow through the population as a whole. As a consequence of interbreeding of species as a reproductive community that is held during together by sex. A biological species forms a reproductive community, an ecological unit, and a genetic unit. A species may be regarded as a reproductive community since its members recognize each other as potential mates for reproduction and propagation. It is regarded as an ecological unit since it forms a constituent of biological community and interacts with other species of the community. Species forms a genetic unit in that it consists of a closed and protected gene pool which is prevented from genetic exchange with other species. Biological species concept, separate species. Difficulties in the application of the biological species concept. However, the biological species concept has many difficulties, some imagined, others real. Reproductive isolation between entire species is often confused with the inability of two organisms with a species to produce offspring. The definition covers populations under natural conditions. Artificial crosses produced in the laboratory are irrelevant. Likewise, a certain amount of hybridization does not contradict the definition, so long as the species remain distinct and can evolve separately. A problem not so easily dismissed arise because allopathic populations are considered as parts of same species so long as they are potentially not just actually capable of interbreeding. Again, isolation between populations refers only to given moment in time or to the so-called non-dimensional mutation. Changes that would isolate contemporary populations can evolve within a single population over a long series of generations, and some persons would like to use such changes as a criterion for delimiting chronospecies in the fossil record. Biological species concept holds good only for sexually reproducing organisms. It does not take into account the evolutionary history of sexually starting from primitive ancestors to the present day. It is true that the present day sexually reproducing organisms are linked to the totally different primitive ancestors of the recent past through a continuous evolutionary chain of series of intermediate ancestors. Biological species concept does not consider this evolutionary contiguity. Furthermore, many organisms are not parts of sexually reproducing populations. They are asexual and not just as the temporary basis but permanently asexual. This circumstance burdens taxonomists with a serious problem for what to do with sexual lineage or clones. Nomenclature proceeds as if each and every organism belong to one and only one species. Evolutionary theory tells us that they will belong to most one species. It is very species concepts difficult to study populations when all one has is a single museum specimen. Paleontologists likewise often much deal with quite fragmented fossil. Biological species concept holds species one, another holds mule. Alive, yes, sterile. Then species A, toad, species B, frog. Toad offspring, frog offspring cannot produce fertile viable offspring. Infertile hybrid. Let's learn some other aspects. According to Cuvier in 1892, the species is the assemblage descended from one another or from common parents and those who resemble each other. Thomson defined species as the group of individuals distinguished by an indivisible set of constant properties and connected by descent and genetic relationship. According to Huxley in 1942, the species can be regarded as a geographically definable group whose members actually interbreed or are potentially capable of interbreeding in nature, which normally in nature does not interbreed freely or with full fertility with a related group and is distinguished from them by constant morphological differences. Species as a group of individuals distinguished by an indivisible set of constant properties and connected by descent and genetic relationship. Species is the most specific major taxonomic rank. Taxonomic literature report innumerable number of species concept. Mayer in 1953 viewed all these concepts of species and grouped them under three broad headlines: typological species concept, nominalistic species concept, biological species concept. Two more species concept have been elucidated as evolutionary or phylogenetic species concept, recognition species concept. So first, polytypic species. It is now a well accepted fact that some species are widely distributed and form many local populations. It is now a well accepted fact that some species are widely distributed and form many local populations. If these species are sufficiently distinct from each other, they are called subspecies. Species which contain two or more subspecies is called polytypic species, and those which do not contain into subspecies are called monotypic species. First of all, concept of polytypic species, Beckner in 1959 was the first to put forward the concept of polytypic species. Sneath in 1962, the proponent of numerical taxonomy, used polythetic, monothetic terms in place of polytypic and monotypic respectively. The concept of polytypic species was most important development in classification of animals. Certain local species that had been described from various parts of the world can be combined into species group allopathic species because they were obviously more close to any other species and lies in mutually exclusive geographical area. When a gap between the ranges of allopathic species are explored, allopathic species integrated with one another, these allopathic species are included into single polytypic species. This concept was greatly simplified the classification of group like birds, mammals, snails, butterflies among insects, etc. The reclassification of all allopathic forms originally described separately as monotypic species has resulted in tremendous simplification of the classificatory system. Such works are almost completed in birds. This concept gave rise to a new thinking in taxonomy called the population taxonomy. But it is not easy to apply polytypic species concept because still there is no foolproof method of recognizing subspecies through good work have been done by Wilson and Brown, Hedberg, Mayer, and others on this subject. Panthera tigris, Panthera tigris, Altiaca, etc. Then subspecies. It is a basic and universal fact that all species vary, and it has been known since long that certain species split into subspecies and races. Linnaeus and Fabricius preferred to call them varieties. The ornithologist H. Schickel was introduced to the term subspecies, defined as a geographically separate aggregator for local population of species. There are many subspecies like geological subspecies, ecological subspecies, polytypic subspecies, temporal subspecies, seasonal subspecies, etc. Monotypic species. When a genus includes a single species but does not include any subspecies, that is, monotypic species is one that does not include subspecies or smaller intraspecific tags. In the case of genera, the term unispecific or monospecific is sometimes performed. Vampirotatus is a vampire squid with a single monotypic genes and also a single species. Dwarf is the only species in the order Tubulidentata. The family Cephalotaceae include only one genus Cephalotox and only one species Cephalotus follicularis. In monotypic species, the species or organism is not divided into the subspecies. In polytypic species, the organism is divided into subspecies at least two. Typically, members of monotypic species classification live within close proximity to one another and share a high degree of biological similarity. If no real distinction can be made among the population members, it is considered a monotypic superspecies. Mayer introduced this term. It is defined as the monophyletic group of closely related and largely or entirely allopathic species. A doubtful population which could not be kept in species or subspecies were kept under the new term semi-species to mark their intermediate nature. This category can be intercalated as usual in the hierarchy between species and subspecies. Simpson superspecies as a group of populations that seems on other groups grounds to have passed beyond the point of potential interbreeding and to have acquired separate evolutionary role, but that are not demonstrated to have done so by the more conclusive evidence of remaining separate when sympatric. It is to be presumed that there are still near the critical point of speciation that of definite isolation and is cannot be unique, quite certain whether they are readily past that point and not just below it. They are nascent species when survive shall collectively form a subgenus or eventually a genus, but have hardly yet reached that degree of divergence and expansion. Some workers recognize two types of superspecies: geographical superspecies and chronological superspecies. Then morphospecies is a taxonomic species based wholly on morphological difference from related species. The morphospecies concept tries to explain speciation by looking at similarity in structure from one species to next. An example of this is mammalian forelimbs. A human, a cat, a whale, and a bat all have similar forelimbs. Because of the similarities in morphological structure, scientists can deduce some sort of common ancestor which contain these structures. And it is much harder to deduce this for something such as bat and human, but there are many cases in which this concept can be more directly applied. Different species of finches due to their different beak size and shape. Then ecospecies and xenospecies. Ecospecies is a group of plants having one or more ecotype within the xenospecies whose members are able to change their genes without detriment to the offspring. The term is coined by Turreson. Then Swingle described it as a group of plants comprised whose members are infertile among themselves but are prevented from the free intercrossing and other groups by either complete or partial genetic barrier. It is also a unit of classification and it is considered as equal to species of classical taxonomy. Then xenospecies, it is a group of plants that represent one or more ecospecies of common evolutionary origin so far as morphological, cytological and experimental facts indicate. Xenospecies of similar comparison is separated through genetic barriers and all hybrid among them are sterile. A term coined by Teresen, and one or more ecospecies are included in a xenospecies which is frequently equivalent and some of subgenes of taxonomic classical taxonomy. Then species complex. In biology, species complex is a group of closely related organisms that are so similar in appearance that the boundaries between them are often unclear. The terms that are used synonymously but have more precise meaning are cryptic species for two or more species hidden under one species, sibling species for two cryptic species that are each other's closest relatives, then species flock, two group of closely related species that live in the same habitat. A species complex is in most cases a monophyletic group with a common ancestor. Species complex exist in all groups of organisms. They are identified by the rigorous study of difference between individual species that uses minute morphological details. Test of reproductive isolation, molecular phylogenetic DNA barcoding, etc. Existence of extremely similar species may cause local and global species diversity.